Virginia State Capitol was built to represent freedom. However, America has been struggling exactly how to uphold this idea of freedom throughout most of its history. The Capitol is located in the business district of Richmond. I found it to be a space of leisure, history, and legislation. When I visited the Capitol, to my surprise, it functioned as an active space rather than some kind of sacred monument, a place for fifth-grade field trips, picnics, and wedding photos. The carefree attitude of the space fascinated me. Other monuments I've visited felt somewhat eerie and consecrated, so I question what spaces demand reverence and what spaces encourage leisure. The Capitol is a historical monument, so I ask, what exactly is the Capitol trying to monumentalize? Its history is extensive and rather controversial. It's where the Virginia legislation meets. It holds one of the only statues that George Washington actually posed for. It was essentially a blueprint for the White House. To some, it represents a place of legislation, and to others, a dark history of racial discrimination. My question remains, what exactly is the Capitol representing? Almost immediately upon entering the Capitol, I was greeted with this quotation: "The most sacred of the duties of a government is to do equal and impartial justice to all its citizens." This can be accredited to none other than the man responsible for the creation of the Capitol, Thomas Jefferson. The Capitol initially was constructed to hold the General Assembly of Virginia, built for Americans to create legislation contributing to this idea of equality for all citizens. This freedom, however, the Capitol intended to represent was a freedom that came with many conditions. So the equality it began to represent wasn't really an equality for all, but a freedom for a narrow margin of those that America felt fit its ideal image of a citizen. This, to me, is why the Capitol, like most monuments in Richmond, is so controversial. These monuments hold on to a broken, warped ideology of what freedom means. They represent ideas that don't conform to the standards that they claim to uphold. And this brings me back to the spatial meaning. Should this controversy change the way that the Capitol is used? Perhaps not the way the Capitol is currently used, but the way that it's thought of. And what I mean is, no one needs to grab pitchforks and riot gear and immediately burn down the Capitol. But we should challenge ourselves to begin to think complexly about these issues. We should use a space like the Capitol not to honor, not to annul, but to acknowledge the past, to understand what history meant to America, when it occurred, and what it should mean to us now. The Capitol should show us the importance of change and the meaning of what this country represents, the power of change and the thankfulness that we can indeed change. It should make us question our freedom, what it means and what it is meant. It should encourage us to continue to expand on the idea of freedom itself, as it is so integral to the foundation of this country. However, this is not to say that all the change that has taken place within the Capitol has been positive. The legislation was responsible for a large part of the disenfranchisement and segregation of African Americans. The Richmond Capitol specifically pushed for the Jim Crow laws of the 1950s. However, later on, the Capitol would go to elect Douglas Wilder, the first African American governor of Virginia. The question that this negative legislation brings up is, perhaps could this almost honoring of the South and the Confederacy perpetuate racism and racist legislation? Or does this dark past highlight our mistakes and show us where we can change in the future? I'm not sure that there's a simple answer to those questions. However, it should be noted that the Capitol has recently been used for protest, for those to push issues that they feel can incite immediate change. And this indicates to me that the people of Richmond feel that this space is significant in a way that gives them a power to incite change of their own. The Capitol and its controversy encourage us to think about why the history of the space matters. It acknowledges to me how wonderful it is that we live in such an ever-changing and growing country. As we grow and expand, we force these issues of race and liberty and freedom constantly. I think that's what I like about the Capitol and our country. Our definition of what it is to be equal will never be the same. It's always changing, it's always constant, and it's always evolving.